You can. Sorry all, I was just chatting away there. Completely missed what the time was. Thank you for coming to this talk about avoiding burnout. I'm Stuart John Chuan. I'm a practitioner psychologist. That's the official name I think that I can use. I'm actually a forensic psychologist by background. So I initially trained in prisons, secure hospitals, probation, places like that. But then I moved away from forensic work specifically, and have been, involved in NHS services, private healthcare. With a couple of ex-colleagues, I set up my own workplace wellbeing service as well, business, and so we run that mainly with companies in the City of London. And that's where I draw a lot of the ideas here from. So I'm going to try and skip through the first half because it's really background stuff and really get to the practical stuff, if that's okay. And what I'm going to cover are three basic things. So what is burnout and how do you spot the signs? How can you help yourself and others? And then practical things to build resilience. There we go. Okay, so what's burnout? The World Health Organization have a definition. They developed this mainly for helpers like medics, doctors, and so on. So it's a syndrome. So it's a collection of symptoms, and it is the result of chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed. Okay, so it's got elements of both. And so we've got three dimensions or three aspects to burnout. So it's exhaustion, and in some of the helping professions, this is not just physical exhaustion, but it's emotional exhaustion as well. Increased cynicism, negativism, or increased mental distance from the work. So not really caring about it as much as maybe you used to. And then the third bit is a low level of personal achievement, or personal efficacy, like you feeling like you're not making a difference. So if you can, you want to participate in this poll, just go to vvox.app and enter those 9 digits. And I can't put it on the screen, but the first question on there, which I'll just open the poll out, is, have you ever experienced these 3 burnout symptoms? And it's got to be 3 together rather than just 1 or 2. Okay, firing away there. So we've got 15, 16, 17. Okay, I'll just give it a bit longer. And then I'll show the results on your phone. Okay, so it's these 3 burnout symptoms all together. Have you ever experienced them? Still got people putting their results in. 46, 45, 47. Okay, I'm going to stop it there, so apologies if you're still trying to do it. Actually, there's 49. Do I get 50? Sold. No, it's hovering at 49. Okay, so I'll stop the poll, hopefully, and I'm going to... okay, can you see the results? Yeah? Okay, so we have nearly 90% said yes. 0% said no, and 10% said not sure. Okay. Does it surprise anyone? No, not whatsoever. Okay. It's very common, basically. And I understand in this industry, in particular, people do go through periods of acute burnout, but sometimes chronic burnout as well. So where it doesn't really have an end period. Okay, thank you very much. What does it look like? So it can also look like depression. And depression is characterized by sort of like feeling exhausted, lack of energy, low mood, negative thinking, trouble sleeping, trouble eating, maybe eating more, eating much less, trouble concentrating, and some cognitive problems like remembering things, following things, even making decisions. So it can look like that. It could look like anxiety, so worrying, ruminating, which is kind of repetitive thinking over and over again about something and never really coming to a resolution. Feeling out of control, helpless, and so on. It can also result in escapist behaviors. So that could be drinking more, eating more. These are basically things to regulate how you feel. Okay. So even things like gambling gives you a rush, gives you a bit of excitement. It's a distraction. So that's why some people might lapse into that. And can lead to physical illness. And the idea is that with burnout, it's the chronic stimulation of the body's stress response. So if you think about fight-flight response, or fight-flight-freeze, freeze is often another stress response that you'll find in the literature. Another one is fawn, which is where you kind of go along with what you're told to do, even though you don't believe in it. So it could be a situation in a company where you're told to do something and you really don't believe in it, but you just go along with it and you never speak up. That could be another stress response. Okay. In that VVox app, I'm going to see if I can open up the Q&A. Are you able to post questions in the Q&A, just to let you know? Can you?
Still got the burnout.
Yes, let me stop that then. Sorry. Let me, do you have like 3 horizontal bars on the left?
3 horizontal bars, but all we've got is a result. So how do we get back to the next?
Okay, let me just...
There
Oop.
we go, yeah.
Oops, sorry. Okay, can you do it now? Can you access the Q&A? Great. Okay, so at any point, if you want to post the question on there, I'll try and have a look and try and answer it. Okay. Right. And the other thing I mentioned is you have this chronic stimulation, this chronic set of stressors, and no time to recuperate. So you can experience stress at acute periods, but then if you allow yourself to recuperate, you reduce the risk of experiencing these burnout symptoms. Okay. I'm not going to show the video here, but this describes a concept called the stress bucket. So the idea is that you have a bucket which gets filled with stress. And one of the things, if you don't have coping mechanisms, like taps on a bucket, imagine taps coming out of a bucket, it will spill over. Okay, and it's a sort of metaphor for how you might deal with stress or not cope with stress. So it's sometimes our bucket might be big, and sometimes it might be small. It's not about avoiding any stress at all, because actually we need stress in our life. So if you think about waking up in the morning, we actually get a cortisol surge that actually gets us out of bed. Okay, so we need stress hormones in order to motivate us. But if your bucket overflows, then you'll have a problem and you're more likely to burn out. Okay, so the idea is that if you need to have regular ways of letting that water out of the bucket. Okay, and I'll move on to some of those ideas in a bit. Okay, so these are kind of circumstances in which it might happen due to work. So this is where you're expected to do too much, where you personally feel that you're not adequate or competent enough to do the work, whether that's real or not, but that's your perception. Feeling unappreciated, working more than 50 hours a week, and I actually do. I time my work every week, and actually, if I go over 45 hours a week, I really feel it. It's just a personal experiment that I've done with myself. 45 hours a week is kind of my limit before I start feeling burnt out. Never feeling that the work you do is good enough, not feeling engaged in the work. If you might be incredibly smart and skilled, but you're in the wrong job, basically, so there's a bad fit between you and the job, and having unreasonable demands placed on you. Okay, and you could argue that this idea doesn't just apply to work. You can think of this as in your personal life. So if you're a parent, for example, or a partner, or so on, okay, that can lead to stress. Okay, so there are some external factors. So as I mentioned, like things like high demand, time pressures, all the kind of things that you're probably familiar with: lack of resources at work, insufficient reward, unfair treatment, problems with the culture, It could be not just bullying culture, but it could be like a badge of honor to work really long hours. And, you know, I've worked with people who get up at 2 a.m. to join a meeting, you know, stuff like that. In the finance sector, if you're spanning sort of America, Europe, and Asia, you want to cover all of those hours. It could be lack of support from your manager or the organization, and sometimes there's a dissonance. So there's a between your values, what you believe, and the values that you see of the company. And I don't mean what they write down as a mission statement or the set of values they put on the website, but by the behaviors that you see in leadership, and what's tolerated and what's not tolerated might go really against your values. Okay, so those are the kind of external ones. Okay, I'm going to come to the questions in a sec. And some internal ones. So, so you might personally have a really high expectations, both of yourself or others. So you may have idealistic expectations, and similar to that, you may be a perfectionist. So nothing's ever good enough, particularly of your own standards. This can lead to things like procrastination, which then, if you don't get things done, leads to more stress, and it sort of goes round and round. Wanting to please other people, and not saying no, and holding a boundary about no. Putting other people's needs first, that's something that's very inherent in the helping professions. Strong need for recognition. Some people, and I've experienced this personally, where I feel I can't go on holiday because I'm irreplaceable. Everything's going to fall apart if I stop looking at my emails or Slack messages and so on. It was a real experiment for me to actually switch off and then find the whole company didn't fall apart. And to be honest, if it did, then there's something particularly wrong about the company that I can't switch off for, you know, a day or a week. And for some people, work is the only meaningful thing that they do, the thing that, you know, really holds their self-worth or their self-esteem. Okay, so that can be a risk factor as well. So the idea is that you can have both external factors, but you can also experience burnout due to the pressure of internal factors. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to open up another poll. Let's reopen this one. So the next question is, are you currently experiencing any external factors, internal factors, or both? Ooh, interesting. So I've got 41. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Let's see. Can you see the results? Yeah? Okay, so most people, 64%, are experiencing both. But after that, most people after that are experiencing internal factors more than external factors, which is quite interesting. I certainly, I mean, of course, I've experienced some external factors in the work that I do, but by far, the thing that's led me to have burnout before are the internal factors. I think part of the reason for me personally is because, you know, with the external factors, I can kind of walk away. You know, I can leave for the day, I can sort of go on my commute or whatever it is, but internal factors I carry around with me all the time. It's difficult to walk away from that, and they might be part of my personality. Thank you. Right, I'm going to see if I can go to some of the questions. Let me just stop showing that. Let's have a look at some of the questions. Okay. Yes, test. Yes. Okay. What do you do if you already have diagnosed anxiety and depression? How can you tell the difference? I don't necessarily. I mean, burnout's not a medical condition. I mean, it is recognised by the ICD-11, but I'm just trying to think what the thinking behind the question is. I don't think it does make a massive difference, because in the end, what you might need to do is the same thing. I'll move on to some of the strategies that you can adopt to try and combat anxiety, depression, or burnout. Certainly, if it gets really serious, you do need to seek professional support. I'm experiencing nearly all of the symptoms of burnout and have for a while. I thought it was just anxiety and depression. Is there a way of fixing this burnout? Well, I guess one of the things that I say to people clinically when I see them in session is they're in a situation. You can either change the situation, change something about the situation, change something about yourself, or change something about both. And often it is a bit of both. So if you think about external factors, internal factors that might be leading you to experience burnout, then, and it could be other things as well, which could be about your lifestyle, it could be about the relationships you're in and so on. You need to think about all of those kind of factors and what you can change. There will be things that you can't necessarily change, you might influence, but there'll be things that you're concerned about that you literally cannot change. Okay, so it could be, concern about a relative's illness. Like unless you're treating that person directly, you can't necessarily influence their medical state. So I often then also talk about with people, what can you control or what can you influence, and get them to focus their energies on that. Okay. I guess there's also a problem if you're experiencing these burnout symptoms chronically. And that's where you really do need to see professional support. I've actually met people who've experienced chronic burnout, and then they've literally not worked for the years afterwards. It's like having a major physical injury. So you think you're like, an elite runner, and one day you just have this niggling injury, or you feeling slightly tired, and just one day your leg breaks. And it's going to take you a while to get back to where you were before. And one of the things that I try and promote is, let's try and get in there early, identify the signs early before you get to that point, which is what I'm going to come on to. You mentioned dipping into behaviours like drinking more, eating more. How do you distinguish between that being a stress response or just something you do in moderation? Ooh. I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, but there are like questionnaires that can give you a score on, like, do you have problematic drinking or drug use, for example. But it's usually if it's pervasive, if it's a pervasive problem, persistent, and it's personal. So, if it's affecting many areas of your life, so it's pervasive, it's going on for a long time, it's persistent, and it's personal in terms of it's affecting you personally, but it's affecting those that are around you personally. Okay, so there's a kind of pervasiveness, a chronicity, and also an impact on people. How are you able to recover from severe and chronic burnout when you're having to quit a job due to the effects? How to heal in a healthy way? Okay, I'll come to that. Healing from 2-year burnout, currently from a toxic workplace. I'll come back to that. If one has been pushed out of a company after burnouts related to unresolved bullying and silence due to lifetime NDH. So I would say, in that instance about being pushed out and about bullying and stuff like that, is try and focus on what you can control. So I have worked with people, or I've got colleagues that work with people that have been subject to discrimination, for example, but they've ended up focusing lots of their energy and ruminating on things they can't control. So I can think of one case recently where my psychologist colleague was really encouraging this person to say, yes, that's unjust and that's discrimination, but what can you actually influence here? What can you actually do here? Okay. How would you recommend dealing with burnout from a middle management position? That's really difficult. For example, stresses from your team you manage below and dealing with stresses from leadership above you. That's really, really difficult one because you're sliced in the middle. You're sort of, people complaining from you, at you from below, but also from above. It's a really difficult one, and I think you need to let's go on to the tips in a bit. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so just to quickly go over this bit, things that cause mental health symptoms at work. The top 3 things in this survey, it's a bit old now, 2019, were too many priorities or targets, working too much, and not feeling supported in the role. So just highlighting that as a sign for you to look out for. And just want you to think about the effects or the signs again of burnout. So one obvious one is being absent from work due to illness, so absenteeism. The one that actually has the biggest impact is presenteeism or sickness presence. So you're at work but you're not well and you're not being productive. And then leavism, which is this one, where you can't really switch off. So even when you're not supposed to be working, you are working. And this was particularly prevalent in COVID times, but I think has continued since in many ways. I really struggle with this, really struggle to switch off. We've got devices that like ping and go bright colours and, notification, da la la, and it's really difficult to just switch off. Some of the costs, so, people say that they're likely to take a sick day. Some even go to A&Es, some feeling like they're going to leave their employer. And as I mentioned, the cost of presenteeism, this was back in 2019, accounted for much more of this total, was it 56 million or whatever, billion pounds to the cost of the UK industry. Okay, presenteeism had the biggest impact. Okay. And just to mention that a lot of people go for reactive support. So, I'm burnt out, now I need to see a therapist or a doctor or something like that. Now, that can be effective, but it in terms of a return on investment, that's about 3 to 1. It's much more effective if you have something within the organisation that just pervades throughout the whole organisation, so you're not just patching people up in a metaphorical A&E. It actually keeps people well and resilient. Okay, so this is the bit I wanted to focus on, spotting the signs. So this is just taken from the Working Mind website, and it's thinking about mental health on a continuum from well, healthy to ill, and you could be anywhere on that continuum. And the idea is there might be signs in different areas of your functioning. So in your mood, your thinking, your behavior, physical changes, and then those escapist, addictive behaviors. So when you're on the well end, you might have good sense of humor, performing well at work, feeling energetic, and sort of moderating your alcohol consumption or no drinking at all. And then as you start to move this way, these are the earlier signs before you get to ill that you might want to look out for. So if you've normally got good sense of humor, but it starts to turn into sort of passive aggressive sort of sarcasm, that might be a sign for you. It could be physically that you start experiencing weight gain, weight loss, or trouble sleeping. Some people get backache more, neck ache, stuff like that. And then as you move even further along, your mood might be getting much more problematic. You might be snapping, getting really angry at work, tearful and so on, that more than you would normally be. Okay, so the idea is that this is a comparison to what's your normal baseline. Okay, those are some signs to look out for. Other signs, there are 2 questionnaires that you can find online, very, very common should be used in primary care by your GP if they don't. PHQ-9 measures 9 symptoms of depression, and GAD-7 are 7 symptoms of generalized anxiety. And it's really simple. You just fill it out. Those links, the first one at the top is patient info if you Google it, and then it will score it up for you. If you score over 10, normally you would be offered some kind of help by the NHS. Okay, and the higher the score, the more problematic the anxiety and depression symptoms are. It's not diagnostic. It's not going to give you a diagnosis. It's just a screening tool. And don't forget, you've got these signs as well to look out for. Okay, so you've got a whole host of signs, and they will be very personal to you. So think of it like a fingerprint. Like everyone, you can look at loads of fingerprints and you say those are fingerprints, but everyone's individual to the person. Okay, so you're going to have your own signature. So your own signature of these kind of signs, and so on. And what can you do? Okay, so if you can, in terms of the external factors, have a conversation with your manager. It could be that actually there's things that could be done about the work. I actually managed someone years ago who I sat down and did a job plan with them, and they were saying, well, I want to do this and I want to do this. They were just very enthusiastic, and I literally said, right, you've got a 37.5-hour week. How do we fit it in? And we couldn't. And I said to her, you can't do this all. What are we going to take out? Now, that's if your manager is that way inclined. But there might be other things that you can do and have much more control over, which is finishing work and switching off, and putting boundaries in, basically. Okay, and that could be the time that you spend on work, turning off push notifications, actually building in breaks throughout the year. I used to be terrible for this. I used to wait until I was burnt out and then book a holiday. Actually, much better to, over the 12 months, have regular intervals where you go on holiday. And for some people, it could be like, a crunch date or something like that, is book a holiday straight after. So your diary can't be filled in. So a lot of these are about holding boundaries. But the last one on there is about making sure your connections with people in the company aren't just about work, because then that can be quite overwhelming in terms of thinking about work, connecting people with about work. It's just work. Okay. Internal factors. These ones are tricky because it requires a lot of self-discipline. Is about trying to think about what's your role and what rules or expectations you're putting on yourself, and are these reasonable? A lot of people that I speak to say, no, I wouldn't expect that of others, but they apply that to themselves. I'm the worst for this in terms of working long hours. I say to my staff, don't work long hours, and then I work long hours. Okay, but it's not an expectation I place on myself. And the way that I now limit this is by looking at my timer app, and how many hours have I worked that week, and I really try and stay under 45 hours a week. If you're prone to ruminating, so this is repetitive thinking that goes nowhere, is to try and break that cycle. So it could be a distraction. I learned on holiday last week that if I play ping pong, table tennis, it's really difficult to ruminate. Really, really difficult. Okay, so there might be something that will just snap you out of that thinking. Physical exercise is quite good as well. Another thing is understanding that what you're trying to do, you have good intentions. You're trying to problem solve something. You're trying to figure something out. But actually, you might need to just let go of that problem, at least for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And in some instances, I might ask people to schedule worry time. Like, how much worry time do you need to apply to that problem or that situation in a day? And I've had people say, well, 2 hours. I say, okay, book in 2 hours tomorrow. But then what you've got to do is before and after that is just not worry about that. But in those 2 hours, you only worry it. The only thing you focus on is that worry. People really struggle with this. And I think part of what it is that whole saying about what you resist persists. And whilst you're ruminating, you're partly trying to figure something out, but you're also partly trying to resist the draw-in of the rumination. It's that resistance that makes it persist. So that's the idea behind worry time. Writing things out, so getting it out of your head, putting it on paper. It can be symbolic and metaphorical in terms of screwing up and throwing away, but also sometimes just seeing the words reflected back to you can be really therapeutic. Sometimes when we're ruminating, we ask these kind of questions that go nowhere, like, why does this happen to me? Like, you ask that question, but you never really answer it. So turning that why question into a how question. So how can I make this situation different or better? And that's more action-oriented rather than just circular. As I mentioned, focus on what you can control or influence. We can end up spending a lot of our day focusing our thoughts, attention, our emotions on things that we can't control, at least right in this moment, or at 2 a.m. when I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, I've got this problem. I'm not going to influence it at 2 a.m., at least not effectively. And then if you've got a self-critical voice, maybe ask yourself, what would I say to a friend about this problem? Would I say, you're useless, why does it keep happening to you? You've got to work harder, you've got to do more. You would sort of listen more, maybe soften the message a little bit. It's not even just the words that you say to yourself, it's the tone that you use to talk to yourself that might be very critical. So you could say to yourself, how can I make things better? Or you could say to yourself, how can I make things better? Come on. Okay, so it's the tone, not just the words. Okay. And some of this stuff you're going to know already, right? So building your resilience. So, eating and drinking healthily. Goes without saying, good mental health rests on good physical health and vice versa. Exercise and movement, and I'm not talking about going down to the gym and doing Zumba classes or high impact training and stuff like that, or running marathons. I'm just talking about being physically active. Getting some sleep. Sleep is very rejuvenating, but really difficult to do if you're burnt out. But don't underestimate the power of sleep. And be kind to yourself, so that's the not being self-critical. And then self-care, so taking breaks, balancing your needs with other people's needs. You might need a reminder to take breaks. You might need to put it in your diary, block out some time. Sometimes it's useful to block out a lunch break, God forbid. Okay. So I want to do a very quick exercise for those that are willing. It'll only take a minute. And this is a breathing exercise that I do with people just to help them relax and sometimes stop ruminating. So what I want you to do is sit fairly upright with both feet flat on the floor. Okay, not too rigid, but just imagine there's a piece of string at the top of your head that's sort of holding you up, so you've got it's like suspending your head, your neck, your spine, everything else is drooping off that. Okay, resting, and your shoulders resting. Okay, and I want you to breathe in a particular way. So as you breathe in, I want you to take the breath down to your diaphragm. So it's not breathing into your upper chest, it's into your diaphragm, which is around about here. So when you breathe in, what should happen is around here it should expand. So, and then when you breathe out, it goes in. Breathe in and breathe out. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. The third aspect, is I want you to breathe into the count of 4. So hold for 2, and then breathe out for 6. Okay, so breathe in for 4, diaphragm, hold for 2, and then breathe out from the diaphragm for 6. I'm going to do it for a minute, starting now. Okay. Would anyone like to give some feedback? Anyone awake? Okay, yes, over there. Yes, you. Yeah, oh, there, yeah. Yeah, I can hear you anyway.
It's one I've used before, and it's really good. I use it for little words.
Okay.
And it makes me, it helps me keep my mind on. So
Yeah,
I don't really use it for phrases not related to your situation.
yeah.
That's it.
Oh, genius, I love that. Yeah. And who else? There's someone. Oh, yeah, yeah, in the middle there.
Hello.
Hello.
It was very calming. Like I was just focusing on counting and I didn't think of anything else. It was just kind of like a mind blank.
Huh. Yeah, good. And I think the important thing is that it's only a minute that I gave you there. I mean, really, do it for 5 minutes is to get a really good effect. But just notice that you can do it for a minute. There's no yoga mat. There's no app that you need. You can just do it anywhere. Okay, you can sit on the toilet and do it. You can even sit in a meeting that you're completely bored with and do it. Okay. So uh, it so I find it really useful for that reason, and I sort of think about it not just in terms of trying to calm down when I'm really stressed, but think of it like brushing your teeth. It's something you do every day in order to maintain good dental hygiene. Well, think of this as a way of keeping good emotional hygiene. Okay, you can just practice on the tube or whatever, commuting. Um, Now, the reason is because what you're doing here is you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite to the sympathetic nervous system, so the fight, flight, freeze kind of stress response. And when we are stressed, we tend to breathe in short, shallow breaths. So, and any idea what happens when you start breathing like that? Not getting enough oxygen or too much oxygen, depending on how you breathe. You can get tense, you can sweat more, you can be fuzzy-headed, you can feel on edge, basically, okay, as if you're ready for action, like ready for some kind of threat. Because what you're doing inadvertently, and this is like, we're not really conscious of this most of the time, is we're stimulating that stress response by the way we're breathing. And we could even just be sitting at our desk or in a meeting breathing like that. Okay, and then if you think about the stress response was really evolved to just deal with an acute stress like, a lion or a tiger on the savannah, that kind of thing, and running away. But if you're doing it for 8 hours a day or even 16 hours a day, you're actually really overstimulating your body. And then when you get to sleep, your body doesn't know how to slow down, because you've kind of trained yourself into this habit of rapid, shallow breathing. Okay, so that's one tip, and I'm going to see if I can get to some of these questions. Let me just check. Oh yeah, so the stuff you can do at an organizational level, but I'm just gonna focus the last few minutes on some of these questions if I can. Where are they? Not there. There. Okay. Right. What about when employers signpost for mental health and publicly are recognised as supporting mental health but behind the closed doors? Horrible toxic boys club. Okay. I see this a lot, actually. There's sort of lip service played to mental health or well-being, and then the behaviours contradict that. I mean, I guess I don't have a simple answer to that one. I mean, where it happens, I guess you need to think about what can you control, what choices do you have. Some people leave, regrettably, but for their own sake. Other people I've talked to have said, no, I'm going to stay because I'm going to be the one influencing how others behave rather than the other way around. So I'm going to lead by example, and I'm going to get into a position where I can change things. So it's kind of really about what you want to do about that. You could end up in that cycle of like why questions, and I would suggest try and convert it to a how question. Can burnout change the worldview of a person? Yeah, very much so. In the similar way that anxiety and depression does, it puts like a filter or a lens on the way that you might see the world. So the three kind of core beliefs that we might have: a belief about ourselves, so it could be I'm a failure; belief about others, people are really nasty; or the world, it's an cruel and unfair place. And you can get really sucked into entrenched views around those three things about self, others, and the world. It can lead to sort of fatalistic thinking as well, which is a big risk. But of course, that's going to send you into a bit of a spiral. The tool I use for tracking my time is called Toggl, Toggl. It's free. There's a free plan, so it costs me nothing. Just a tip as well, that I use the API and I send a report to my customers or my bosses, so that they can, it's an automated email that gets sent to them every 3 days, so they can track my time as well. How much responsibility should be put on the organisation? A lot, I would say. And that's what I was going to talk about here. So, you know, as mentioned earlier, in terms of return on investment, it's much more effective to have an organisation engage in practices which support well-being and good mental health. It's a bit like, you know, I could give someone skills to deal with stress, but if they're always going to go back into that toxic environment, they're on a losing streak. All I'm doing is just sending them in with a plaster, just to patch them up. And sometimes, you know, I've been in situations, not specifically about workplace, but really toxic situations where I've said to someone, I can't see you any longer if you keep going back there. Because all I'm doing is helping you to get, like, you know, abused or harmed. You know, I'm just sending you back in with more skills to cope with the harm that you're experiencing. So yeah, I think the environment's really important, but you've got to remember that there are internal factors as well that really drive burnout, which I mentioned before. More gamers need to do Pilates because the breathing exercise alone helps me weekly. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if you're in an industry where there's a lot of sitting down, a lot of staring at screens, it's really about mixing that up, going out for walks, connecting with nature, connecting with people in person, that kind of stuff, just to mix it up. Can burnout be contagious? So someone you know and have a good relationship with at work has it, and their behaviour rubs off on you as well. I guess so, yeah. I don't see why it's not, and I think some people might try and help the other person, but if you can't, then some people, what they do is they might limit the time that they spend with that person, and they spend it with other people who perhaps aren't bringing them down. Okay, so mixing it up. Okay, so hopefully apologies if I didn't get to your question. Does anyone have another question that they want to... There's a feedback form there. Big QR code to take you to if you want to leave some feedback. But any questions before we finish? No? Okay. Oh, yep.
Hello. Yeah, just wondering if you had any strategies for trying to identify the cause of these symptoms. You might feel like you experience some of the things that you listed there, but not have the awareness, or be so chronic that you struggle to articulate to management or to other people why. Because I think that's something I've suffered with in the past, where I feel like I'm burnt out, but when I have a conversation with my manager and they say, how are you feeling? Oh, not very good. Oh, what can we do? I don't really know how to answer that question. And it's obviously quite, it's a difficult thing to work yourself around, because you don't necessarily know what the cause is if it's something that's ingrained for such a long period of time.
Yeah, no, that's a really tricky one. I mean, sometimes people have to go to counselling or therapy to try and work those kind of things out, or, you know, read self-help books to kind of get some ideas. Some people really struggle naming emotions, so that they really struggle to then identify what it is they feel. in some cases it's useful for people to think about physical signs rather than emotional ones, as the sign that something's amiss. And in terms of like the question about what to do, if you think about the opposite problem is when you thrive, when you're in a really good place, what's going on, and then think about perhaps I need more of that in my life, rather than thinking what's wrong now. If that's helpful. Yeah. I mean, I do ask people in therapy, not just like, say, for example, if they're depressed, I ask them, have there been periods of your life when you've not been depressed? And then ask them what's been going on, what was going on at that time. Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
What do you do? You've spoken a lot about if you notice these signs in yourself. What do you do if you spot, or you think you spot, some of those signs in other people around you, whether it's a loved one or someone at work or whatever it is? What can you do to kind of, because obviously you don't want to necessarily confront them with it, because it might react quite badly to it. So what would you suggest would be kind of first steps to?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one, because like for a lot of people the urge is to fix or try and help the person, and they might not be at that place, they might not have the awareness, or even if they do, they might not be very receptive to being given advice. It's quite a complicated one, because you kind of have to go at their pace and their journey. It might be that you need to get them to think about what do they really care about, what's really important to them, and is what they're doing right now aligned with that. So, for example, if what they really care about is family, or they really care about is their own health, or they really care about contributing. I've had people that sacrifice their own needs and then really burn themselves out, and I've had to kind of gauge with them what's really important to you is helping others, and how are you going to be able to help others if you're burnt out, off sick, unproductive. You're not going to be able to help other people. But it's really tapping into what's really important to the person. Okay. Oh, should we sneak in one more? And I know I'm over time. I feel like I've done something wrong.
Sorry. Yeah, this is quite a specific one, but do you have any ways of identifying, talking about like the internal factors, identifying what people pleasing and not being able to say no behavior is versus just sort of being helpful and I don't know, doing doing things that I feel like I'm supposed to do, but then it can do you have any idea on how to like identify the difference between the two?
Yeah, I've got this problem. And what I ask myself and other people is, when was the last time you said no? Or what would you say no to? Or what would make you leave this job? And often there's this silence where they're kind of like, oh God, what is it? And people really struggle, and I just get them to articulate and make explicit what is the line for you, because it then becomes really apparent that some people just don't have a clear line, and hence why things always, that boundary always gets broken. So start with writing down where's the line. I even talk to really, really senior leaders about this, and even they struggle with this. So it's something that's quite pervasive. Okay, we better stop there. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.